Well, folks, now it's no surprise to anyone who's been paying attention that for the last decade, Democrats have been losing voters in all 30 states, bleeding support like holes in the Titanic. And their genius fix for this is more AOCs and more commies, which is pretty much like trying to save a leaky boat with a Dixie cup. Then you've got Gavin Newsom, the Botoxed housewife of Sacramento, declaring war on election rigging in Texas, while California can't even rig potholes shut. The pattern is obvious. Democrats keep shrinking, keep panicking, keep pretending that shouting, "Save democracy," will somehow cover up their monumental failures. In short, they're out of ideas, out of credibility, and soon out of voters.
I'm trying to calm down a little bit, but you know, John just quoted a remarkable stat out of the New York Times that in the 30 states where they track voter registration over the past 4 years, Democrats have lost to Republicans in every single state.
Good.
So this is the $24 million question, right? Why are Democrats not?
Because you're crazy.
Why are the polls bad? Why are they not breaking through?
Because you suck.
And I think it's a couple things. I think one is the people who are breaking through are brave. Right.
Oh,
they talk
shut
about
up.
Humans, they make the case, you know, and again,
Shut up.
And it's like Pritzker's chief of staff told me, it's not necessarily left versus center, it's fight versus cave. And the people who fight get support. And the people who cave or are mealy-mouthed or are, you know, very sort of corporatist-y, that crew, the crew that's afraid, cannot break through. Does not appeal to voters. The question is, it's only going to be for people who really feel authentic, right?
There isn't a shred of authenticity on your side.
Chris Murphy,
you sound fake saying
Brown,
this.
Mondami, these people, AOC, they're not all exactly the same politically, but they are the same in the fact that they're brave and they break through.
And that's their shared quality, folks. They all suck. They're all awful demagogues, liars, cheats, corrupt, power-hungry lunatics who in any other generation of American politics would have been booted from whichever party they tried to join. But today, they found a home in the Democrat Party precisely because the party no longer has a spine or a sense of integrity. When leadership is built on liars and cheats, the rot trickles down through the entire institution. Now let's talk about what this moment actually reveals. Democrats hemorrhaging voter registrations across the country isn't a fluke. That's not a messaging issue. That's a structural collapse of their credibility. And yet, the people tasked with diagnosing the problem, your Scarboroughs or your Molly John Fasts, come back with the exact opposite prescription. They look at the hemorrhaging and conclude, Democrats really need more of AOC and Mamdani. More radical activists, the same ones who pushed everybody away. More people who preach like zealots and legislate like Twitter influencers. In other words, if the medicine is killing the patient, hey, how about you double the dose? This isn't just a failed strategy, it's a failed culture. Democrats have built their brand on moral theatrics instead of real results. From the universities to the halls of Congress, they've absorbed the lesson that performance matters more than actual policy results. Authenticity in their world isn't about consistency, it's about outrage. That's why when AOC rants on Instagram Live, it comes across as authentic. Not because she has solutions, but because she performs the anger the base demands. But authenticity without responsibility is just performance art. And voters across the country are tired of paying Broadway ticket prices for a third-rate political improv show. Now, also notice the fallacy taking place in Molly's analysis. She frames this as a fight versus cave situation, as if the only options in politics is performative pugilism or cowardly corporatism. That's a false dichotomy up and down. You can fight for principles with competence and substance. Ronald Reagan surely did. Trump did. Even Bill Clinton did in his own way. But Democrats today can't even imagine that lane because their intellectual ecosystem has been hollowed out by Marxism, by the likes of Bernie Sanders, AOC, and Mamdani, the same folks that they want to have more of. Basically made it so that if you are not shouting and wagging your finger at the man in their party, then you're invisible. If you're not extreme, you're irrelevant. And if you dare to be pragmatic, well, you're just a traitor. And that's why they're losing. Not just because they're too corporate, but because the loudest people in the room are activists who confuse noise for vision, for policy, for actually getting things done. Voters are registering Republican not because they suddenly love every aspect of the GOP, but because the alternative has become absolutely intolerable. People will choose flawed but sane over polished but insane every time. So when this two-colored cat lady props up figures like AOC or Mamdani as the future, what she's really admitting is that the Democrat Party is now locked in a death spiral of its own making. It's no longer a coalition of working-class voters and moderates. It's a stage show for elites and radicals. And the more they double down on this formula, the more voters walk away. Democrats think they've found their fighters, but outside the MSDNCs of the world, outside their very limited bubble, Americans see them for what they are: performers in a collapsing clown show.
Why they like Gavin Newsom? He wants to own Donald Trump. He wants to be Donald Trump light. You can't be Donald Trump light. Hey, Gavin, talk into the camera and talk about making life more affordable.
He's not going to do
only
it
for people in California, but if you want to talk about people in New Hampshire, our people in Iowa, our people in South Carolina,
never gonna happen.
They would like to know how their lives can be more affordable.
He can't do it.
Not how you can own Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not running again. These Democrats, who I have called Chuck Wepner instead of Muhammad Ali, Chuck Wepners, they're the ones that are running again. They're the ones that are in the boxing ring.
When you're a Democrat and you lose Joe Scarborough, you know you're in for a bad time. The thing about Gavin Newsom is that he's not governing for anyone. He's staging political theater. And the reason he leans so heavily on a spectacle is simple. He has no policies worth bragging about, no real solutions for working class Americans, no accomplishments he can point to. Instead, he's left with gimmicks, sound bites, and attacks on his opponents, one who can't run for office again, that being Trump, because California, under his leadership, has been defined by decline. And let's look at the numbers. California now has the highest unemployment rate in the nation as of July. Over 1 million people without jobs. That's 5.5% of our population. Since Newsom took office, over 800 major businesses have literally fled the state. That's without even including the countless small businesses. Many of the businesses fleeing are Fortune 500 companies. You even have household names like In-N-Out moving operations to other states, Twitter relocating to Texas, SpaceX building in Nevada. Even entire movie studios are pulling up their stakes and going abroad because it's easier to shoot in Bulgaria than it is in California. In the last 4 years alone, Greasy Gavin's policies have cost California close to 100,000 jobs. On top of that, the state is staring a $12 billion annual deficit. That's not a bump in the road. That's a man-made crater created by Gavin Newsom. And yet, what did Gavin spend his time doing yesterday? Roasting Bed Bath & Beyond for coming out of bankruptcy and deciding not to reopen in California. He mocked a company that had every reason to avoid the state's hostile business climate. Folks, let that sink in. In a state where people are desperate for jobs, where businesses are fleeing in record numbers, Greasy Gavin decided to use his platform to dunk on an employer for refusing to subject itself to his failed system. That's not leadership. That's arrogance. That's political theater masking economic collapse.
Retail giant Bed Bath & Beyond is making a comeback. Not sure if you knew about this, but the company announcing today that they will not be opening or operating retail stores in the state of California as they go through this comeback, calling it the most expensive and risky environments for businesses in America. It's a system that makes it harder to employ people, harder to keep doors open, and harder to deliver value to customers.
And Gavin's response to that was, fuck you, bye. Well, that's an interesting way to treat businesses. Doesn't really scream pro-business, but what do I know? I only live in this state and see firsthand how Gavin's policies have driven jobs, investments, and opportunity out the door. Anyway, Greasy Gavin followed that beauty up with, after their bankruptcy and closure of every store like most Americans, we thought Bed Bath & Beyond no longer existed. We wish them well in their efforts to become relevant again as they try to open a second store. Look, doing the sassy gay man routine or the spicy woke torta-ass Latina act on your government-verified X account to mock a company that just clawed its way out of bankruptcy, all while California bleeds jobs and leads the nation in unemployment, is truly the definition of desperate cringe. That doesn't read like leadership, folks. It reads like petty Reddit snark. California doesn't need a roast master-in-chief. It needs a governor who can make the state competitive again instead of bankrupt again. Now, there's some in the media who will try to defend this kind of behavior, saying that Gavin is taking on the Trump style. But here's the reality, folks. Gavin isn't fighting for workers. He's fighting for headlines. This is a purely narcissistic endeavor because there's nothing else for him to point to. And this is where the larger cultural trend comes in. Democrats have grown addicted to performance politics. They've learned from social media that outrage and snark drives clicks, while serious policy solutions get ignored. So they've turned governance into a content strategy. Gavin isn't just a governor anymore. He's a poster boy for Instagram politics, curated, shallow, and ultimately fake. But here's Gavin's biggest problem, though. Donald Trump can get away with political theater because it's baked into his brand. He was a celebrity long before he was a politician. People expect him to be entertaining even when he's abrasive. Gavin doesn't get that luxury. He isn't funny. He isn't charismatic outside of his base. And when he uses the same playbook, mocking businesses, picking fights with random constituents, playing the celebrity politician, it doesn't come across as bold. It comes across as desperate. Regular working class Americans, especially the undecided independent voters, don't see strength in that. They see weakness. They see a man more interested in roasting employers than actually fixing unemployment. And that's the bigger story here, folks. Democrats are losing not just voters, but credibility. Their leaders no longer even try to solve problems. They perform righteousness. They posture against Trump. They mock corporations, the job creators. It's crazy. And they mistake applause lines for progress. But ordinary Americans know the difference. They feel the empty wallets, the lost jobs, the higher cost of living. And we're all realizing that when the curtain comes down on this clown show, there's nothing behind this sort of performance. It's all just failure. And the performance itself just serves to cover up the fact that this man is a huge failure. No matter how many Gavin Newsom memes you see on the internet right now, so many people praising him, folks, know that this is about 5% of the population, maybe even less. That's the base of people who are supporting this man because they are desperate to have somebody that they feel stands up to Trump. But in doing that, in elevating Gavin Newsom and getting him to essentially abandon his own principles, which, let's be honest, wasn't hard for him to do in the first place. It's not like he had too many. They've effectively stripped Gavin of the last thing he had going for him as a politician. The fact that he was a politician. Now he's just a wannabe X or Instagram or fill in the blank influencer who's obviously going to fail. Because, as I've said, as soon as the primaries start, folks, and he starts getting heat from his own side, that's where Gavin Newsom is going to get battle tested. Until then, all of this is pure talk. And I'm not even taking into account the fact that he's going to lose a special election on November 4th. That's going to be a huge L notch on his belt that he will take into the primary and which will get exploited by the likes of Josh Shapiro, of Amy Klobuchar, of Elizabeth Warren, who will also bring up his affairs, likely. Elizabeth Warren loves to do feministic stuff like that. We all know that. We all remember the way that she did that with other people at primaries and during elections. Anyway, all that being said, Hair Gel Lennon himself is still out there trying to make a case about why he should be allowed to strip Californians of their rights in this new redistricting push.
If they don't move, if Republicans stand back, they have an off-ramp. This initiative, our efforts don't go forward. We're doing this only in response to what he's doing. So if he doesn't want us to move forward, he has some capacity to influence that, not just in his own state, but by making the case to other governors in other states that this is not the right thing to do, that we should all stand back, support nationalized, independent redistricting, and we should let voters choose their representatives, not the other way around.
Gavin just unintentionally exposed himself, folks, because this clip says everything you need to know about how Gavin would govern if he ever makes it to the president, period. Straight up, his instinct is a top-down approach. That goes against one of the most important principles this country was founded on, decentralized power. America works because the states are not vassals of Washington, D.C. They have independence. They make their own rules, and they balance one another's excesses. That's what keeps us free in America, but not in Gavin's America. In Gavin's America, you play by his rules, whether you live in California or Texas or anywhere in between. And we've seen this movie before, folks. During COVID, Gavin issued over 400 executive orders consolidating authority in ways the courts later ruled were unconstitutional. He told churches when they could and couldn't meet. told small businesses whether they could open, told families how many people they could have over for Thanksgiving dinner. And he did it with a smug confidence that he was entitled to decide for everyone in the state, for the 40 million people in the state. That same instinct is showing up again with his redistricting stunt. Californians actually voted twice to create an independent redistricting commission to take the power out of the hands of politicians like Gavin and give it back to the voters. That was supposed to be a check on the abuse of power. Gavin has decided to override the will of the people, essentially hijacking the system to retaliate against Texas. He's not fixing democracy, folks. He's weaponizing it in his favor. And by the way, look at the framing, okay? Gavin insists this is about letting voters choose their representatives, not the other way around. That sounds noble, but it's a sleight of hand. What he's really saying is that if Republicans pursue redistricting in Texas, he'll retaliate by overriding the very reforms Californians already chose. He dresses it up as high-minded reform, but it's pure political theater with one objective: consolidate power for his side. This isn't about fair maps, folks. It's about punishing your enemies and centralizing control so you can expand your own power base. The bigger picture here is cultural. Democrats over the past 2 decades have shifted from celebrating pluralism and local control to demanding uniformity across all institutions, in the media, in education, in business, and now in state governance. The new mantra is compliance. The idea that diversity of thought or policy can coexist is seen as dangerous by most Democrats. So when Gavin says Texas should fall in line, he's not just talking about redistricting, he's pushing the worldview that only one set of rules should govern the whole country. His rules. Gavin said it, so you gotta follow it. It's California's ideology exported nationwide, even though Californians themselves are leaving the state in record numbers just to escape the Gavins of the world. And here's why this matters: because independent voters, moderates, even many Democrats don't actually like this style of politics. People want competence, not total government control. They want leaders who solve problems in their own backyards, not lecture other states while our state crumbles. But Gavin can't run on results. He can't point to a thriving economy, safe streets, affordable housing, or world-class schools in California. So he substitutes swagger for substance. He mocks, he postures, he plays the national savior, anything to distract from the reality that California has been falling apart under his leadership. So let's call this for what it is. It's not leadership, it's not vision, it's total desperation. A desperate attempt to turn redistricting into a national soapbox to mask failure at home with chest thumping abroad. And the irony is, the more he pushes this authoritarian one-size-fits-all vision, the more he reminds the rest of the country why we have federalism in the first place. America doesn't need a roast master-in-chief, and we don't need a California governor trying to govern every other state. We need leaders who respect the limits of their power. And until Greasy Gavin learns that, every state he tries to lecture will just be another stage for his downfall.
Our mindset here in California is one of accountability, responsibility. We have agency. Yeah. We're not bystanders. We can shape the future by asking the voters in a transparent and temporary way to make a determination for themselves to change our maps mid-decade in response to what occurred in Texas on November 4th.
I truly want to understand why Gavin feels entitled to tell Texas, or any other state for that matter, how to run its elections. He's a governor of California, not the self-appointed referee of American federalism. What gives him the right or the authority to disenfranchise California voters just to make a political point against Republicans in a whole other state? This isn't about accountability or transparency. It's purely about control. Gavin sees the cracks in his own foundation. Republican and no party preference registrations creeping up in California, Democrats bleeding credibility across the map in academia, culture, and the National Party losing ground with people like Mamdani and AOC leading it. So his answer isn't to fix the rot at home, but to stage a performative power play to position himself as a Democrat strongman, a future presidential contender who can spar with Trump on the national stage. The irony, of course, is that in trying to project strength, he exposes the insecurity at the heart of modern progressivism. When persuasion fails, they reach for manipulation. When culture slips from their grasp, they scramble to rewrite the rules. And in the long run, that desperation doesn't come off as leadership. It comes off as weakness. So the real question isn't whether Gavin wins his little stunt or whether Democrats manage to squeeze out a short-term advantage. It's whether You're willing to keep accepting the cycle of manipulation as normal politics from Democrats. How many times can the Democrat Party cry democracy while bending the rules to preserve its own power before the word itself loses any meaning? And at what point do we stop mistaking control for leadership or theatrics for strength from people like Gavin? These aren't just stories about politicians. They're mirrors reflecting what we allow in our culture, our institutions, and our daily lives. So the challenge is simple. Will we keep swallowing the narratives Democrats feed us, or start asking why the people who shout the loudest about accountability are always the ones most afraid of being held accountable? You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.